She had been practicing for years, sitting at the piano every day for hours, fingers dancing over the keys until her hands ached. Music was her world, the place where she felt alive and free. But today was different. Today, she had to face a crowd that didn't know her, and some of them were already judging her before she even played a single note. The hall was filled with people, the kind of audience that could make or break a musician's career. Critics sat in the front row, pens in hand, eyes scanning every move she made. A few seats away, some people whispered and exchanged smirks, making it clear they weren't expecting much. She could feel their eyes on her, like a heavy weight pressing down. Her heart beat faster, and she tried to steady her breathing. Backstage, she could hear the murmur of voices. Other musicians talked quietly, some giving friendly advice, others making sarcastic comments under their breath. One of them laughed softly, and she caught the sound. It wasn't mean-spirited, at least not exactly, but it was enough to make her stomach twist. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, reminding herself of why she had started this journey in the first place. She loved the piano, loved the way music could touch hearts, and she wasn't going to let a few whispers take that away. She remembered the early mornings and late nights, the days when her fingers were raw and sore, the countless times she had replayed a single passage over and over until it felt like it belonged to her. She thought of her teacher, who had always believed in her even when no one else did, and of her family, who had made sacrifices so she could follow her dream. That thought gave her a small spark of courage. As she walked toward the stage, the lights felt blinding. The murmur of the crowd grew louder, and she could feel the tension in the room. She sat down on the piano bench, adjusted the sheet music, and placed her hands lightly on the keys. The audience's eyes seemed to pierce through her, some curious, some skeptical, and a few openly mocking. She heard a faint chuckle from one side of the hall and felt a sting. People didn't know her story. They didn't know the nights spent alone in a small room, pouring her soul into every note. All they saw was a girl about to play a piano in front of strangers, and they thought they could judge her. She closed her eyes for a moment and let her mind drift to a calmer place. She imagined the keys beneath her fingers, the music flowing through her as if it were part of her own heartbeat. She remembered the first time she had played in front of a small crowd, how nervous she had been, and how alive it had made her feel. That feeling came back now, a reminder that the stage was not just a place of judgment but also a place of magic. The conductor gave her a small nod, signaling that it was her turn. She opened her eyes and looked at the audience one last time, seeing the skeptical faces, the doubtful eyes, and even the occasional smirk. She took another deep breath, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys. She didn't need to impress anyone. She only needed to be true to herself and the music she loved. The first note sounded soft and tentative, almost fragile, like a whisper. She felt the tension in the room, the doubt in the air, but she let the music carry her. Each note followed the last, slowly gaining confidence. She felt herself sinking into the rhythm, forgetting the eyes on her, forgetting the whispers. She was no longer just a girl at a piano. She was the music itself. But even as she played, she couldn't ignore the occasional cough, the shuffle of feet, the quiet murmurs that reminded her the audience had not yet been won over. Some people were still skeptical, waiting for her to falter. The pressure was immense, and she felt it pressing down like a heavy weight. She reminded herself that every great performance came with doubt and fear. This was not a sign of failure. It was part of the journey. Her mind wandered briefly to the faces of the critics she had met before. They were known for being harsh, for finding flaws where others saw brilliance. She had faced criticism many times, but this felt different. This was a moment when every eye was on her, when one mistake could overshadow years of hard work. She focused harder, letting the music flow from her heart rather than her mind, letting the story she wanted to tell guide her fingers. The melody became richer, fuller, each note carrying emotion that words could not express. She could feel the change in the room, even if it was subtle at first. A few people straightened in their seats, paying closer attention. Some lips that had been curled in smirks began to relax. She didn't notice it at first, too absorbed in the music, too intent on pouring every ounce of herself into the performance. Time seemed to stretch. Each note became a heartbeat, each chord a pulse of emotion. She could feel the energy of the room shifting, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The laughter and whispers had not disappeared, but they were being drowned out by the sound of the piano, by the story she was telling with her hands. She felt a small thrill of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could reach them. She remembered why she had started playing. Not for fame, not for approval, but for the way music could touch someone's soul. She wanted to make people feel something real, something deep, and she let that thought guide her. The nervousness was still there, a constant companion, but it was no longer paralyzing. It had become a fuel, a reminder that she cared deeply about what she was doing. As the first part of her piece came to a close, she lifted her hands from the keys, letting the final note linger in the air. Silence followed, heavy and uncertain. She could feel the tension, the pause before judgment, and she held her breath. She had done her part, given everything she had, and now it was out of her hands. The audience's reaction would come soon enough. Some clapped politely, some remained still, waiting for more. The critics scribbled notes, their faces unreadable. She sat there, hands resting lightly on her lap, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. This was only the beginning. She knew the real challenge was still ahead, but for the first time that day, she felt a spark of pride. She had faced their eyes, their doubt, and had not run away. Backstage, she could hear whispers of curiosity, of surprise, even admiration. People were talking about the piece she had chosen, the way she had started so softly and carefully, letting the music speak for itself. She took another deep breath, letting the small victories settle in her chest. It was not over yet. The main performance was still to come, and the true test of her courage and talent was waiting just beyond the curtain. She looked at the piano, her instrument, her friend and companion through countless hours of practice. She touched the keys lightly, feeling the familiar smoothness beneath her fingers, remembering every lesson, every struggle, every triumph. It was more than just a performance. It was a culmination of years of hard work, of dreams, of persistence. She knew that no matter what happened next, she had already proven something to herself. The audience, though still skeptical, had begun to notice her dedication, her skill, and her heart. The whispers of mockery had not vanished entirely, but they were quieter now, overshadowed by the story the piano was telling. She felt a renewed sense of determination. The music was hers, and she would let it shine no matter what anyone thought. As she prepared for the next section, she straightened her posture, lifted her chin slightly, and let herself breathe. The journey was only beginning, but she had taken the first step. She had faced ridicule and doubt and had not faltered. The room was watching, waiting, but she was ready to speak through her music, to show them who she truly was, one note at a time. Her heart was racing, but it was no longer just fear. It was excitement, anticipation, and the quiet, steady pulse of someone ready to transform doubt into awe. She took a moment backstage, wiping the sweat from her palms and feeling the tension in her shoulders. Her heart was still racing from the first tentative notes, and she could hear snippets of conversation from the other performers. Some spoke with encouragement, offering small smiles and nods. Others whispered critiques, comparing her style to theirs, as if her worth could be measured in their opinions. She tried not to listen, but every word prickled her, reminding her how much was at stake. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here. Years of practice, of waking up before dawn to play scales, of giving up other pleasures just to chase a dream that sometimes felt impossibly far away. She remembered evenings where the house was quiet except for the sound of her fingers on the piano, the echoes of mistakes haunting her, pushing her to try again and again. Every note she had ever played had led her to this moment, and she refused to let doubt steal it from her. Walking toward the stage again, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The audience had shifted slightly, people murmuring among themselves, some exchanging glances that hinted at skepticism. She knew she could sense their impatience. A few people had even scoffed when she had first begun her piece. Those sounds still echoed in her mind, but she forced herself to focus on the music, the story she wanted to tell through the keys beneath her fingers. Backstage, she noticed other performers watching her closely. Their eyes measured her, and she could feel the invisible pressure of comparison. Some seemed impressed, others skeptical, and a few smirked as if they were waiting for her to falter. She reminded herself that they did not know her, did not know the countless hours she had devoted to mastering her craft. Their judgments did not define her, but it was hard to shut out the voices completely. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath and visualizing the notes she would play. She imagined the hall quiet, the audience leaning in, hanging on every sound. The melody flowed through her mind like a river, familiar and comforting, and she let that feeling fill her. It was a reminder that music was not about approval but about expression. This thought grounded her, giving her a small but steady confidence. When she returned to the stage, the lights felt hotter, the eyes of the crowd more intense. She sat at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys, and allowed herself a moment to feel the weight of the room. Every critic, every whispering audience member, every doubtful glance. She acknowledged them but did not let them control her. She was here for the music, for the story she had to tell, and nothing else mattered. She began her next piece slowly, letting the melody build gradually. Her hands moved with growing certainty, each note a brushstroke painting the picture she wanted to share. The audience shifted in their seats as the music filled the room. Some eyebrows rose, some heads tilted, and a few people who had been murmuring quietly fell silent. The rhythm of the piece seemed to pull their attention, drawing them into her world. For a moment, a thought crossed her mind. What if she faltered? What if the critics wrote her off after this? But she pushed it away. Every performer faced moments of fear. It was part of being human, part of standing on a stage with the eyes of strangers upon you. The trick was to channel that fear, to turn it into energy rather than letting it crush her. She let the emotion seep into her playing, giving depth and nuance to each note. As the piece grew in intensity, she noticed subtle changes in the room. Some skeptics leaned forward, their expressions softening. A few people who had initially appeared dismissive now seemed captivated. The music carried them along, making them feel the story she was telling, even if they didn't realize it at first. It was a small victory, but an important one. She could feel the connection forming, fragile but real. Her fingers moved faster now, the melody weaving through highs and lows, crescendos and pauses. She felt a surge of exhilaration. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment where her preparation met opportunity. The nervousness had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something powerful, something that drove her forward instead of holding her back. She let herself feel the music fully, letting it flow through her as if it were part of her very being. The audience responded subtly at first, with quiet gasps and attentive eyes. Some shifted closer to hear better, their expressions changing from doubt to curiosity. She could feel the energy in the hall shifting, the atmosphere becoming charged with anticipation. It was intoxicating and it gave her confidence. Every note was a declaration of her dedication, a statement of her identity as a musician who refused to be defined by mockery or skepticism. She thought about the people who had doubted her in the past, teachers, critics, even friends who had teased her ambitions. They were not present here, but their echoes lingered in her mind. Instead of letting them drag her down, she used those memories as fuel. Each note she played was a response to every sneer, every whisper, every shadow of doubt that had followed her for years. She was proving to herself more than anyone else that she belonged on this stage. As the piece continued, she began to notice individual reactions. A young woman in the front row had tears in her eyes. An older man who had been skeptical from the start was leaning forward, clearly moved. Even some of the critics seemed intrigued, scribbling notes but with expressions of interest rather than derision. She did not let herself be distracted by the applause that had not yet come. Instead, she focused entirely on the music, letting it carry her and the audience together. She reached a particularly difficult passage, one that required every ounce of concentration and control. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision, yet there was a softness, a vulnerability that made the music resonate even more deeply. She felt a thrill of satisfaction. This was what she had trained for, this was what she had dreamed of, and now she was living it. Every challenge she had faced in practice had prepared her for this moment, and she embraced it fully. The hall was now quiet, the earlier whispers and laughter replaced by attentive listening. People were no longer judging her, they were experiencing her, feeling the story she was telling through sound. It was a delicate shift, but it made all the difference. She had begun to turn doubt into engagement, mockery into admiration, and skepticism into wonder. The transformation was happening not just in the room, but inside her as well. She was discovering her own power, the power of music to touch hearts and minds. She allowed herself a small smile, though her focus never wavered. The fear that had gripped her earlier was still present, a shadow at the edge of her consciousness, but it was no longer controlling her. She felt a sense of liberation, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had given everything she had to the performance. The music was hers, and for the first time, she felt that she was truly communicating with the audience, not just playing notes on a page. The final moments of the piece approached, and she played with growing intensity, building to a climax that had been carefully crafted over years of practice. Her heart pounded, her breath quickened, and yet she felt entirely in control. The notes soared, filling every corner of the hall, carrying emotion that words could never capture. She knew that the audience was caught in the moment, swept along by the music, unable to look away. As the last notes faded into silence, she held her hands above the keys for a heartbeat, letting the echo linger. The room was quiet, almost reverent. She allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, to absorb the change she had felt in the energy of the crowd. The mockery and doubt had not disappeared entirely, but they had been silenced, if only for a moment, by the power of her performance. Backstage, she could hear whispers of surprise and admiration. People were talking quietly, some expressing disbelief, others clearly impressed. She felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. The journey was far from over, and the real test of her courage and talent was still ahead, but she had taken another step. She had begun to win over an audience that had doubted her, and that was no small feat. She stood up from the piano, feeling the weight of exhaustion and exhilaration at the same time. The applause had not yet erupted, but she could sense the momentum building, a shift in perception that was undeniable. She allowed herself to savor the small victory, the knowledge that she had faced doubt and fear and had not faltered. The music had done its work, and she had done hers. Her mind wandered briefly to the next section of the performance, the more challenging and emotional part that would truly test her skills. She felt a surge of determination. The audience was now listening with curiosity and respect, and she intended to hold their attention all the way through. The journey was not yet complete, but she was ready. She had faced mockery, fear, and skepticism, and had turned them into energy, focus, and art. As she returned to the piano for the next segment, she felt a quiet confidence settling in. She had begun to tell her story, and the audience was beginning to understand it. Each note, each pause, each subtle shift in melody was a conversation, a bridge between her world and theirs. She was ready to continue, ready to show them the depth of her talent and the strength of her spirit. The music was her voice, and she intended to speak clearly, powerfully, and from the heart. She took a deep breath as she prepared for the next part of her performance. The first pieces had warmed the audience to her music, but she knew that the real challenge was ahead. This was the section that would demand everything she had: skill, emotion, and courage. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she also felt a strange excitement, a spark that made her fingers itch to dance across the keys. As her hands settled on the piano, she allowed herself a moment to look at the crowd. The skeptical faces were fewer now, replaced by curiosity and attention. Some people leaned forward, eyes fixed on her, as if trying to catch every subtle nuance. Even the critics seemed to be watching more intently, their pens poised but their expressions softer. The shift was subtle but undeniable. She felt a surge of confidence. She had begun to break through the barriers of doubt. The first notes of the new piece floated into the air, delicate and tentative at first, then growing in clarity and strength. She let herself become completely absorbed in the music, each chord a reflection of her journey, each melody a whisper of her soul. She imagined the audience not as critics or strangers, but as friends listening to her story, feeling the emotions she poured into every note. She could hear the faint rustle of clothing, the soft intake of breath from someone captivated by the beauty of the music. The room was no longer full of doubt. It was filled with expectation and wonder. She allowed herself to smile slightly, not in arrogance but in quiet satisfaction. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of, and now she was living it. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, as the piece built in intensity. The melody twisted and turned, rising and falling like waves on a stormy sea. She felt her own heartbeat sync with the rhythm, every note a reflection of her life's struggles and triumphs. The music spoke emotions she could never put into words, and the audience responded instinctively, drawn into the world she created with her piano. She noticed a young man near the front, eyes wide and unblinking, completely absorbed. A little girl leaned toward her mother, fingers tapping lightly in the air as if she could play along. Even the critics seemed to be leaning forward, their skepticism melting into curiosity. It was a magical moment, the kind that musicians lived for, when the music bridged the gap between performer and audience, leaving judgment behind. The piece demanded technical skill and precision, and she pushed herself to the limits of her ability. Her hands flew over the keys, yet each movement was deliberate, each note intentional. She could feel the energy of the room feeding her, and she used it to drive her performance to new heights. The nervousness that had gripped her earlier was still there, but it was now intertwined with exhilaration, pushing her forward rather than holding her back. As the music reached its midpoint, she began to weave in subtle variations, small flourishes that brought out the emotional depth of the piece. She had practiced this section countless times, but performing it live felt different, alive. Every sound resonated not just in the hall, but in her own heart. She felt a deep connection to the music, a sense of being fully present in the moment, and that presence translated into the way the audience responded. She saw faces in the crowd soften, expressions changing from polite interest to genuine emotion. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. A few wiped tears from their cheeks, caught off guard by the intensity of what they were hearing. She felt a swell of satisfaction and humility at the same time. This was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about sharing a piece of herself, and the audience was finally receiving it. She pushed through a particularly challenging passage, her fingers moving in a blur yet never losing control. Each chord was precise, each melody line clear, yet there was a vulnerability woven into the performance. It was that combination of skill and raw emotion that made the music compelling, that made people stop judging and start feeling. She felt a deep joy in that realization, a confirmation that she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. As she transitioned to the softer, more delicate part of the piece, the room seemed to hold its breath. The notes were gentle, almost like whispers, yet they carried a depth of feeling that was impossible to ignore. She let herself be carried by the music, letting it express the tenderness and fragility she often felt but rarely showed. She imagined the audience leaning closer, their hearts opening to her story. In that moment, she was not a performer under scrutiny. She was a storyteller, and the piano was her voice. She could hear the subtle reactions now. Soft gasps, the shifting of chairs, the quiet sighs of people moved by the beauty of the music. The skeptics were few, almost invisible now, their attention captured despite themselves. She felt a thrill run through her, a confirmation that she was breaking through the walls of doubt, one note at a time. It was an exhilarating feeling, knowing that her music could touch people so deeply. The piece began to build again, rising to a crescendo that demanded her full attention and energy. Her hands moved with precision and passion, every note resonating with emotion. The audience was completely engaged now, drawn into the ebb and flow of the music. She could feel their collective breath, the shared heartbeat of the room, and it energized her further. Every movement of her fingers seemed to command the air itself, carrying the story she had been trying to tell for so long. She thought briefly of her past failures, the times she had stumbled in smaller performances, the moments when doubt had crept in. Those memories now fueled her, reminding her how far she had come. Every mistake had been a lesson, every setback a stepping stone, and now all of it culminated in this moment. She felt a sense of triumph, not over anyone else, but over her own fears and insecurities. The final passages of the piece required a delicate balance of strength and subtlety. She played with intensity yet allowed the music to breathe, letting each note resonate fully before moving to the next. The audience seemed suspended in time, caught in the magic of the performance. She felt a profound connection to them, a silent communication that transcended words. She was not just playing the piano, she was sharing her soul. As the last few notes approached, she prepared for the climax, a moment that would leave the audience holding their breath. She poured every ounce of energy, emotion, and skill into these final chords, letting them ring out with clarity and power. The room was silent, every ear attuned to the music, every heart responding to the story she had told through her fingers. It was a moment of pure connection, a moment she would remember forever. The last note lingered, a shimmering echo that seemed to hang in the air, refusing to fade. She held her hands above the keys for a heartbeat, savoring the silence that followed. Then, slowly, the room began to respond. A few tentative claps started, growing steadily as the audience erupted into applause. The skeptics had been won over, the doubters silenced, and the curious fully captivated. She felt a rush of relief and joy, knowing that her performance had touched them. Backstage, she could hear whispers of admiration and surprise. Other performers exchanged glances, acknowledging the impact of what she had just done. She felt a quiet sense of pride and accomplishment, but she also knew that the journey was not over. The most important part of her performance was still ahead, and she needed to maintain her focus and energy. The experience so far had strengthened her confidence, and she was ready to continue, determined to make the final part even more powerful. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself absorb the energy of the moment. The applause, the attention, the silent respect, all of it was a testament to her dedication, her love for music, and her refusal to be defined by doubt. She took a deep breath, feeling the connection she had established with the audience, and allowed that feeling to flow back into her as she prepared for the next section. She was ready to show them the full depth of her talent and emotion. The audience had begun to lean forward, captivated by her performance, and she felt their anticipation. She allowed herself to feel a quiet excitement, knowing that this was her moment to shine. Every note, every pause, every subtle shift in the music was a reflection of her journey and her heart. She was no longer playing for approval or validation. She was playing for the truth of her experience, and the audience could feel it. It was a powerful, exhilarating, and humbling realization that gave her strength for the final stretch of her performance. She felt the tension and excitement in the air as she began the climactic section of her performance. Her hands rested lightly on the keys for a brief moment before she let them move with full confidence, each note deliberate and powerful. She could feel every eye in the room focused on her, but instead of fear, she felt a strange clarity. This was the moment she had been preparing for her entire life. The music surged forward, strong and expressive. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving in perfect harmony with the emotions she wanted to convey. Each chord seemed to resonate not just in the hall but in the hearts of the audience. She could feel the collective energy of the room, the attention and curiosity that had grown with every note she played. People were leaning in, caught in the magic she had created, completely drawn into the world of her music. She noticed subtle changes in the audience. Faces that had once held doubt now reflected wonder. Eyes widened in amazement, and some leaned closer, unable to contain their fascination. A few people who had been skeptical at first now had tears forming at the edges of their eyes, moved by the depth and intensity of her playing. Even the critics, known for their harsh judgments, seemed captivated, their pens still but their eyes glued to her hands. She felt her heart swell with emotion as she played, the culmination of years of dedication pouring out through every note. This section demanded both technical skill and expressive nuance, and she met the challenge with determination. Her fingers moved with grace and precision, yet there was an undeniable passion that made the music come alive. Each note was more than a sound. It was a story, a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her triumphs. The melody rose and fell like a river, carrying with it a range of emotions. The music became louder, bolder, more dramatic, filling the hall with a presence that could not be ignored. She could feel the audience responding instinctively, holding their breath at moments of tension, leaning forward in anticipation, and exhaling softly when a delicate passage swept over them. She was no longer performing for approval. She was sharing her soul. Her mind was fully immersed in the music, every thought focused on the sound, the rhythm, and the emotion. She could feel the connection to the audience deepening with every measure. The skeptics had been silenced, replaced by captivated listeners. She played with a confidence that came not from arrogance, but from a deep understanding of her own abilities and a trust in the power of the music itself. She noticed a young boy in the front row, completely absorbed, eyes shining with admiration. An older woman had tears streaming down her face, touched by the beauty and intensity of the performance. The music had reached them in a way that words never could, and she felt a rush of gratitude for the opportunity to share it. The audience was no longer passive. They were participants, living the emotions she conveyed through every chord and melody. The piece demanded intricate passages, rapid sequences that tested both skill and focus. Her hands moved almost instinctively, guided by muscle memory and intuition. Yet there was also an intentionality behind every movement, a deliberate shaping of the music to communicate exactly what she wanted. She felt exhilaration and concentration, fear and joy, all at once, and she channeled these emotions into her playing. She could feel the room vibrating with the intensity of the music. The audience was silent, completely absorbed, hanging on every note. Even the usual murmurs and coughs were gone, replaced by an atmosphere of reverence and anticipation. She had succeeded in capturing their attention, drawing them into her world. It was a rare and powerful moment, one that few musicians ever experienced, and she savored it fully. As the piece reached its crescendo, she allowed herself to play with even greater freedom and expression. The notes soared, filling every corner of the hall, resonating with power and emotion. She felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that she was communicating something real, something profound, beyond the reach of words. The music spoke directly to the hearts of the audience, leaving them unable to look away. She noticed reactions that filled her with awe. People who had been skeptical now sat in stunned silence, completely captivated. Some were holding their breath, as if afraid to break the spell of the music. A few covered their mouths in disbelief, overwhelmed by the beauty and skill they were witnessing. She realized she had reached a point where judgment no longer mattered. The music itself had taken over, leaving everyone speechless. Her fingers moved with increasing intensity, navigating the technical demands of the piece with precision while maintaining emotional depth. She felt a sense of freedom, a release of tension that had built up over years of preparation and doubt. Each chord and melody line was infused with her spirit, and she could feel the audience responding to the honesty and authenticity of her expression. The final passage approached, and she focused on delivering it with power and grace. She played each note with deliberate care, letting it resonate fully before moving to the next. The music built to a powerful climax, filling the room with sound and emotion. She felt the collective heartbeat of the audience, the shared energy and anticipation, and she let it guide her hands. Every note became a bridge between her world and theirs. The last chord rang out, lingering in the air like a shimmering echo. She held her hands above the keys for a moment, allowing the sound to fade naturally, giving the audience time to absorb what they had just experienced. Silence followed, heavy and complete, a testament to the impact of her performance. The room was frozen in a moment of awe, and she felt a rush of relief and triumph. Then, slowly, the audience began to react. A few tentative claps started, growing steadily into a wave of applause. People rose to their feet, cheering and clapping with enthusiasm. She could see tears, smiles, and expressions of pure admiration. The skeptics had been won over completely. The music had transcended doubt, ridicule, and expectation, leaving everyone present deeply moved. Backstage, she could hear the murmurs of astonishment and admiration. Fellow musicians exchanged impressed glances, acknowledging the brilliance of her performance. Critics whispered among themselves, their notes filled with observations rather than judgment. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not for fame or recognition, but for the knowledge that she had shared something deeply meaningful and touched the hearts of those listening. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, feeling the mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that comes from giving everything in a performance. Her hands were tired, her heart raced, but her spirit was soaring. The connection she had made with the audience was unlike anything she had experienced before. She realized that every moment of doubt, every hour of practice, and every challenge she had faced had led her to this point. The applause continued, filling the hall with a sense of celebration and admiration. She smiled, feeling a mixture of humility and pride. The mockery she had faced earlier seemed distant now, a shadow that had been completely erased by the power of her music. She had turned doubt into wonder, skepticism into admiration, and in the process, she had proven to herself that she was capable of greatness. She glanced around the hall one last time, taking in the faces of those who had been moved by her performance. She felt gratitude for the opportunity to share her passion, to communicate something that went beyond words. The experience had been transformative, both for her and for the audience. She knew that this moment would stay with her forever, a memory of triumph, courage, and the profound power of music. As she stood from the piano, the applause still ringing in her ears, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and fear, and had emerged victorious. The music had spoken where words could not, leaving everyone in the room speechless and profoundly moved. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that talent, dedication, and courage could overcome any obstacle, and that the true power of music lay in its ability to touch hearts and transform lives. She stayed still for a moment, breathing slowly as the applause continued to echo through the hall. Her hands, still slightly trembling from the final notes, rested gently at her sides. She looked out at the audience, unable to hide the emotion rising in her chest. People were still standing, clapping with a kind of energy she had never experienced before. Some were wiping away tears while others smiled warmly, as if they had been waiting for a moment like this for a long time. She bowed her head slightly, unsure how long the applause would last. It felt endless, as if the room had been set free from some quiet restraint the very moment her music ended. The sound washed over her, lifting her spirit with every passing second. She felt a mix of relief, pride, and disbelief, because in her heart she never expected the performance to touch people so deeply. Behind the curtain, she could hear soft movements as staff prepared for the next performer. But the stage manager waited, understanding the importance of what had just happened. No one wanted to rush the moment. The light from the overhead lamps warmed her skin, and she felt a strange calm settle over her. Finally, when the clapping slowly began to fade, she bowed once more and stepped away from the piano. Her legs felt slightly weak, but there was a lightness inside her that made each step feel almost effortless. When she reached the side of the stage, she gently pressed her hand to her heart, trying to steady herself. The moment she stepped backstage, she was greeted by stunned faces. Some people looked amazed, others emotional, but all were filled with admiration. A few fellow musicians approached her quietly, offering soft congratulations. One gave her a gentle tap on the shoulder as if to say, "Well done." Another simply nodded with a proud smile, understanding the weight of what she had just accomplished. She nodded back, too overwhelmed to speak at first. She tried to take a deep breath, but her chest felt tight with emotion. She moved to a small bench placed against the side wall and sat down, letting her hands fall loosely into her lap. For a moment she simply stared at them. Those same hands that had caused her so much doubt in the past. Hands she had pushed through endless hours of practice. Hands that had finally proven what she was capable of. With the sound of the applause still fading behind her, she closed her eyes and replayed the performance in her mind. She remembered the shift in the audience's energy, the silence that had filled the hall as soon as she began to play, and the look of awe in their faces. It was not just about playing the notes correctly. It was about pouring her emotion into every key she touched. And she had done that. She had given the audience everything inside her. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. One of the event organizers had approached her, offering a bottle of water and a warm smile. "Are you all right?" the organizer asked gently. She nodded slowly, trying to steady her voice before speaking. "Yes, I'm okay. Just taking it all in." "You deserve this moment," the organizer said kindly. "Everyone out there is still talking about your performance. You should be proud of yourself." She whispered a quiet, "Thank you," and took a small sip of water, feeling the coolness travel down her throat. The organizer placed a supportive hand on her shoulder before heading back to their work. She sat for another moment, feeling the emotions wash over her again. A few steps away, she noticed two stage crew members watching her with wide eyes. When they realized she had seen them, they offered shy thumbs-ups. She smiled and nodded back, appreciating their quiet encouragement. After a few minutes, she stood and smoothed out the wrinkles in her clothing. She knew there would be people waiting to talk to her. Judges, audience members, staff, maybe even critics. The thought made her nervous, but she also felt ready. She had faced the judgment of others before, but now she carried something stronger than fear. She carried proof. Slowly, she made her way toward the hallway that led to the reception area. As soon as she stepped inside, she was met by a rush of voices. People turned to look at her, and the room instantly grew louder. Several individuals hurried toward her, eager to speak. An older man stepped forward first, his eyes shining with emotion. "Dear, that was one of the most beautiful performances I've heard in years. You have a gift." She thanked him politely, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Another woman came next, almost out of breath as she approached. "I don't usually cry during performances," she said with a trembling voice, "but you made me cry today. Your music felt real." She felt her throat tighten. She had always dreamed of moving people with her music, but hearing it directly was overwhelming. She smiled gently and thanked the woman. A couple of critics stood a short distance away, holding notebooks but not writing in them. Instead, they were simply watching her with an expression she rarely saw on their faces: respect. One of them stepped forward and offered his hand. "You played with honesty," he said in a calm, steady voice. "Not just skill. That's something rare." She shook his hand politely, her gratitude silent but profound. More people gathered around her. Some asked how long she had been practicing. Others asked what inspired her. A few teenagers looked at her with admiration, whispering excitedly to one another. She tried to answer every question with patience and sincerity, but she still felt like she was floating in a dream. As she continued speaking with people, she noticed someone else approaching. A young girl, no older than 10, clutching a small notebook in her hands. The girl looked nervous, her steps slow and uncertain. Her eyes were wide with admiration, and her hands trembled slightly as she came closer. The musician knelt gently so she was at eye level with the girl. "Hi there," she said softly. "Did you enjoy the performance?" The girl nodded eagerly. "It was so beautiful," she whispered. "I want to play like that someday." She shyly held out her notebook. "Can you sign this?" The pianist's heart melted. She took the notebook carefully and signed her name with a small message encouraging the girl to keep practicing and believing in herself. When she handed it back, the girl hugged the notebook to her chest and beamed with joy. "Thank you," the girl said softly. "I'll never forget this." She felt her eyes sting with emotion as she watched the girl walk away. The evening went on, filled with conversations, compliments, and heartfelt exchanges. She could feel a new sense of confidence forming inside her. She had always believed in her music, even when others doubted her. But now she had a moment she could hold on to, a moment that proved to her that she was capable of touching people's hearts. Later, after the crowd had thinned and the hall grew quieter, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The sky was dark, sprinkled with soft stars, and the world felt calm again. She walked a short distance from the building and took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. She looked up at the sky and smiled to herself. She remembered the times when she had been laughed at, questioned, or dismissed. She remembered the comments that made her doubt her abilities. But all of that felt far away now, replaced by the memory of the room standing in silence, hanging on to every note she played. She had proven something not just to the audience but to herself. As she stood there, she closed her eyes and allowed the quiet to settle around her. She felt peaceful, strong, and proud. The world would move on, but this moment would stay with her forever. It was a reminder that even when people doubt you, even when the noise of the world tries to drown you out, there is a place inside yourself where your true voice waits. And when you finally let it speak, it has the power to change everything. With a final deep breath, she turned back toward the building. There were more performances ahead, more crowds, more challenges. But she no longer feared any of it. She had found her strength. She had found her voice, and she would carry it with her for the rest of her life.